Okay, well, I'm showing 10 o'clock on my clock. Should I go ahead and get started, Travis?
Yeah, let's go ahead and jump into it here. We'll do the antitrust policy real quickly.
Okay.
Megan, if we can go to slide 3, please. Hi, everyone. I'm Travis English. There's my slide there. I'm in charge of training and outreach here at WECC. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm going to just review our antitrust policy real quickly. All WECC meetings are conducted in accordance with the WECC antitrust policy and the NERC antitrust compliance guidelines. All participants must comply with the policy and guidelines. This meeting is public. Confidential or proprietary information should not be discussed in the open session. This webinar is also being recorded and will be posted publicly. By participating, you give your consent for your name, voice, image, and likeness to be included in that recording. WECC strives to ensure all the information presented today is accurate and reflects the views of WECC. However, all interpretations and positions are subject to change. If you have any questions, please contact our legal counsel. With that, we'll take a quick look at the program here. We're going to Branden Sudduth giving us a quick welcome and a view of the geography of resource adequacy in the West. And then we'll turn it over to a panel discussion with our regional contributors, with Chris Waper moderating. And then we'll have a stakeholder discussion where we invite you to share with our panelists, and our moderator for that will be Victoria Ravenscroft. And with that, I'll turn it over to Branden Sudduth. He's the Vice President of Reliability Planning and Performance here at WECC. Branden, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Travis, and good morning, everyone. And welcome to the first webinar in WECC's Resource Adequacy virtual discussion series. And I've been watching the participant count over about the last minute, and we jumped from around 75. We're up to about 122 participants currently. So you can see the importance of this topic. As Travis said, my name is Branden Sudduth, and I'll be kicking off this webinar. This first discussion sets the groundwork for the series by exploring the varying analytical boundaries and roles in the region's resource adequacy landscape. This series will help WECC gather stakeholder input on its Western assessment of resource adequacy and other resource adequacy analyses. We will be holding these webinars the first Wednesday of the month through November at the same time as we're holding it today. So please join us as we explore the different aspects of resource adequacy. The next webinar will take place on August 3rd, and we'll focus on understanding various resource adequacy reports, analytical approaches, and findings across the interconnection. As Travis mentioned, we have some great panelists today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. But before we get to the panel, we have a short video map to get us started. Following the video, Travis will take it from there. So if we can go ahead and tee up the video.
A good place to start a discussion about resource adequacy in the West is to understand the lay of the land. We'll take a couple minutes to look at the various ways the West is broken up in terms of resource adequacy, and we'll look at the status of renewable or clean energy targets, a main driver of resource planning decisions. The Western Interconnection includes all or part of 14 Western states, the Canadian provinces of British Columbia and Alberta, and a small portion of Baja, Mexico. In terms of our resource adequacy analysis, WECC divides the Western Interconnection into 5 subregions based on geographic location, load characteristics, and historical partnerships. Other entities divide the West in different ways, depending on their needs and the scope of their analyses or programs. WECC has 37 balancing authorities. A balancing authority is an entity that is responsible for balancing the load and generation in its footprint under WECC's mandatory standards regime. WECC receives its resource adequacy data from balancing authorities. Another way to divide up the West is by utility. Investor-owned utilities, or IOUs, are responsible for resource planning across the West. IOUs are regulated by state utility commissions. Sometimes, the balancing authority designation that WECC uses aligns with the footprints of investor-owned utilities, but that is not always the case. Another way to divide the West is by resource adequacy program. Currently, there are 2 resource adequacy programs in the West. There's the California Independent System Operator Resource Adequacy Program covering most of California, and the Western Resource Adequacy Program, or WRAP, which covers a large part but not all of the rest of the West. Understanding how different entities divide the West helps us begin to piece together the complex resource adequacy puzzle. Next, we'll talk a little about a major driver of the changing resource mix in the West. That is, clean and renewable energy policies. These policies have shaped and will continue to shape resource planning and resource adequacy for years to come. Over the last 10 to 15 years, some states adopted renewable energy targets, also called Renewable Portfolio Standards, or RPS, and more recently, clean energy targets. The application of RPS targets varies across the states and even within states. For example, Colorado has different targets for different types of entities. These state targets go a long way towards shaping resource planning decisions. 6 states have targets in place to be reached by 2025, and by 2030 that number increases to 8. By 2040, we start to see clean energy targets working their way into the landscape. Currently, there are 4 states aiming to be 100% renewable or clean by 2045, and another 2 by 2050. Overall, all but 3 states in the West have some kind of renewable or energy target in place. But state governments are not the only ones creating renewable and clean energy policies. A number of cities in the West have adopted clean and/or renewable energy targets as well. Like the state policies, these have different target dates, going out as
Did anyone else lose volume on the video here?
Yep.
Megan, maybe the video quits playing, perhaps? It looks like it might be paused. Well, welcome to life in the digital world, everyone. We'll just take a moment to get the video up and going here.
Travis, it's a great video with great info, but maybe in the interest of time too, we press on.
Beautiful. Let's do that. I'm going to see if I can steal the screen for Megan. I think Megan is gone altogether, to tell you the truth. Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you. We'll get this squared away here. Chris Raper is our Vice President of External Affairs here at WECC, and she's going to be leading our panel discussion today. Chris, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our great list of panelists here, and we'll get the slide deck worked out here.
All right, thanks, Travis. And I want to thank our team internally for the work that they did putting that video together. It is unfortunate that it did not finish playing because they did put a lot of work and effort into that. And I think that it has really valuable information. So these are things that we'll post on our website after this discussion has ended. And so you'll be able to watch the full video and the remainder of what we didn't get to see once it's posted on the website. But moving on to our panel, we have a terrific top tier of panelists today to discuss resource adequacy. We have Chair Megan Decker from the Oregon Public Utility Commission, Dede Subakti from the California ISO, and Todd Komaromy from APS. And with that, I am going to move directly into questions, and we'll start with Chair Decker. And then how about, we'll, in the order that I introduced. So we'll do Chair Decker and then Dede and then Todd. And if you can just start with kind of a short analysis or talking points on what is your role in resource planning. We've intentionally picked people from different areas of the resource adequacy landscape in order to get kind of a fuller picture of what goes on and who has responsibility for what. So if you can tell us what your role is in resource planning, and then how do you influence or inform resource adequacy decisions?
I think that's my cue. Good morning, everyone, and thanks to WECC for inviting me to be part of this discussion. Like the person from WECC who was speaking before, I'm really impressed with how many people are on here and eager to get to some dialogue with you folks. So hopefully it won't go on too long, but my role in informing resource planning and resource adequacy as a state commissioner is, of course, at the most basic level, that we oversee investor-owned utility planning, procurement, and cost recovery of the resources that provide resource adequacy at a utility by utility level within our state. We also, to be clear, develop or are in the process in Oregon of developing expectations for resource adequacy for electricity service suppliers who serve large customers through our direct access program. The way I think as a state commissioner we influence resource adequacy, in some sense I'll describe as setting a tone. Talking about reliability as a or the primary responsibility and as a prerequisite to successfully meeting our climate policy responsibilities is an important tone that I like to think we set collectively as commissioners. Another thing that we do, and I guess I'll just speak for myself, in setting a tone that is in balance or maybe sometimes in tension with what I just said, is that we add some friction. We worry about the cost and risk of different approaches and how that flows through to consumers. We try to ask about and anticipate potentially inconvenient consequences that haven't come up in sort of the base case modeling. And we also seek to prevent distortions in resource procurement and due to business model or regulatory incentives. It's important to remember, I'll just say that in regulating utilities and requiring and overseeing utility planning, we are not making resource decisions for utilities. We are setting expectations and demanding reasonable approaches and asking hard questions. And I'll just describe this with a little parenting metaphor, which I know Chris Raper loves a good story, and a parenting metaphor will be right up her alley. So I would say that in relation to commissions as the parents and utilities as the kids, these are not toddlers where we're making the decision and, you know, offering apples or grapes is more of a something to make them feel good, right? These are at least teenagers where all we have is kind of a judicious use of side eye and the power of the purse as they make their own decisions. And, you know, we might engage in some amount of loose collusion with the parents of their friends, our colleagues in other states. But really this is my role in influencing resource adequacy is really one step removed from the important decision-making and commitments around resources and system operation that utilities are making. The last thing I'd like to say here is for resource adequacy in particular, I'm going to continue my parenting metaphor and say that I would like to send my teenagers off to a good college where they have, they're living in a dorm with a resident assistant backed by a resident professor who's in charge of the whole dorm and seeing all the teenagers doing their thing together. And that is my analogy for the Western Resource Adequacy Program, which I think is a really, really important step for our region, and I know is at a critical point for getting underway. I think that there are some real limitations, and we'll talk about those later, in a individual commission's ability to really understand, influence, and inform resource adequacy without the broader lens that I think that program and also the studies that organizations like WECC do.
Thank you, Chair Deckert.
Thanks.
Appreciate your intro on that. Love the metaphor. It makes me think that I should roll back and tighten the purse strings on my 17-year-old a little bit, though, and parent a little more like I regulated when I was at the Idaho Commission. Before we go to Dede, huge oversight on my part. I was so worried about pronouncing Todd's last name correctly. I failed to introduce the fourth member of the panel, who is WECC's own VP of Reliability and Planning and Performance Analysis, which is Branden Sudduth. So he'll be our fourth contributor on this panel. And my apologies, Branden.
I thought you were letting me off the hook, Chris. I got excited for a second.
Absolutely not. You're a vital participant in the conversation. So we'll go to Dede now, and I'll just reiterate, it's your role in resource planning and how do you influence or inform resource adequacy decisions?
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Dede Subakti. I currently serve as a Vice President of System Operation in California ISO. I have been in this role for a little bit over a year. So prior to my current role, prior to my promotion, I guess, I serve as a Director of Operation Engineering Services, where I directly was responsible for what I call the administrations of resource adequacy program within the California ISO BA. Now, I think some may know this and some might not know this. Within the California ISO BA, we have a lot of load serving entity. You might have heard the investor-owned utility, right? The PG&E, SE, San Diego's, and whatnot. But really, we have a lot more load serving entities. And each of that load serving entity have their local regulatory authority. The LRA, the local regulatory authority, and that local regulatory authority actually have their own somewhat similar but different program for resource adequacy. The largest program is the one that is actually a California PUC, for example, that is the LRA to many of our LSE. But it's not just one program; it's actually a collection of many of different California programs, so to speak. And I get, when I was the Director of Operation Engineering Service, I got to manage every single one of those on how that programs actually get implemented in the California ISO BA. So a little bit of background about that administration of resource adequacy program within that California ISO BA. So basically the load serving entity, we call it the LSE, within the California ISO BA area, they have to show to California ISO that they have sufficient contracted resources to serve the load and meet the planning reserve margin requirements set by their own local regulatory authority. So, like I mentioned, everyone is different. So that load serving entities have to do that in the year ahead as well as in the month ahead process. And our department, our folks get to do that. We have to validate that there is sufficient contracted resource to meet the resource adequacy obligation for the whole California ISO BA area. So it's a very interesting job, very interesting thing. How we got to see how resource adequacy that is being planned from the year ahead, from the month ahead, and it gets to the real-time operations on how we actually end up operating the system. So in that job, in what I call in the operating horizon, in the operations, it's really about threefold. Number one is we are validating that what we call the resource adequacy plan, cross-reference it between what the load serving entity is saying that they have a contracted generation resources, and then we cross-reference it with the supplier side, which is the unit, the party that is selling that contract. So that's the first one that we do. The second that is very interesting also within operating horizon, and I think this is very unique in the operating horizon, and that is making sure that those resources contracted for that month are indeed available. So if there is a planned outage, planned maintenance for the unit or resources for a subset of days within the month, then we have to make sure that there is then sufficient capacity substitution being made available for the BA, because you don't get to just show it and then walk away for maintenance, right? So it's one of those things that we have to manage as well. And of course, the third one, as it gets towards the day ahead and the real time, we make sure that the contracted resources are made available to the BA, offer it in the California ISO day ahead market and the real time market. So then we can actually dispatch that unit. We can actually commit that unit. So once it gets to that day ahead and real time time frame, my operator, California system operations staff will continue to assess the need for the capacity because things change in the real time. So if we have a need to procure more additional capacity, California ISO is allowed, and we have the ability to do a backstop capacity procurement. We have what we call the capacity procurement mechanism. That's a backstop procurement. It can be done for a system need where the system as a BA need it, or it could actually be done for local area needs. Local area is when you have some transmission congestion constraint and you need it in a specific area. Because at the end of the day, reliability is number one. For us, system operations, reliability is number one. If we need to do backstop capacity procurement, we would do it to ensure that the BA load is served. So that's kind of like a nutshell of what I do and my responsibility and how I fit back to the resource adequacy plan program, and to be able to say that, yeah, this works, or we need more, or what we see, how it actually end up working in the day-to-day dispatch, in the day-to-day unit commitment to serve the load. So I appreciate the time and opportunity to be panelists today. Again, thank you. I hope to be able to converse and contribute to the betterment of the Western interconnections. Thank you.
Thanks, Dede. Is it safe to say then, from a CAISO perspective, yours is less to influence than it is to verify?
In the operations perspective, we are verifying, validating, and we are providing feedback, right? We're providing feedback what is working and what is not working. One of the other things that we actually do is in the California program, there is a specific resource adequacy that is just the traditional load capability for planning reserve margin. That is traditional. That is a PUC. That is the LRA program. But the California ISO is actually setting the target for the local capacity requirements. So in other words, California ISO is the BA transmission planner, transmission operations. We know what is needed for a local area because of the congestion, because of the transmission limitation. So that local area capacity resource adequacy requirement is actually set by technical studies, and that local capacity requirement is actually set by California ISO for that local area. We also have what we call a flexible resource adequacy capacity, and this is a little bit different because we have that duck curve. And for the flexible capacity, we also set the target of how many type of flexible capacity that we need. We believe that not all capacity is the same capacity, but there is a need for a flexibility in the dispatchability of that resources. So for those two items, for the local capacity as well as the flexible resource adequacy capacity, we actually work with our LRA. We work together. We actually set that target number. For the traditional PRM, traditional stuff, that is set by whoever that local regulatory authority, they set that target.
Gotcha. Thank you for the clarification. And we will go on to Todd Komaromy, who I hope I pronounced his last name right after my efforts and introducing Branden entirely. And if you can tell us from APS's perspective, from a utility perspective, what's your role in resource planning and how do you influence or inform resource adequacy decisions?
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and you've said it perfectly. Todd Komaromy, Director of Resource Planning for Arizona Public Service. I think most of you know this, but Arizona Public Service is a vertically integrated utility. We're the largest and oldest serving in the state of Arizona. So my team, when you're thinking about resource adequacy, we lead the external and internal efforts to align on all of our RA decisions. We have what we call a Resource Planning Advisory Council, or the RPAC, which is made up of advocacy groups, regulators, developers. We meet on a monthly basis, and we talk about all things in the resource adequacy space. We also prepare and update our integrated resource plan for the company, and this takes the contributions of many across our company, but it is in that planning horizon. We work hand in hand with the resource acquisition team, and so if any RFPs that are issued, we certainly do all the analysis and validation of information that comes in to determine what our resource mix should look like for the future, including any kind of PPAs that we might get in place. We also represent the company in front of our state regulator, which is the Arizona Corporation Commission. So those are a number of different aspects. There's a lot of additional smaller items that go into it, but I'll leave you with that. And I'm happy to be here and looking forward to the rest of the questions in the panel.
Thanks, Todd. And we will go to Branden last for his intro on those matters, and then we'll go to more of a discussion format between the panelists.
Great, thank you, Chris. And I have to echo Chris's sentiments about the video that we started watching. Great job to the staff at WECC, and it really started to cover a lot of what I was going to cover in terms of WECC scope. But for resource adequacy, WECC collects future year information about the system from the balancing authorities, primarily through our annual loads and resources data collection process. And then we use that information to perform interconnection-wide assessments of resource efficiency over the next 10 years. Much of the work that WECC has historically done in this area has been to support national efforts at NERC, such as the development of NERC's long-term reliability assessment, as well as their seasonal assessments. But over the last couple of years, we've heard from our stakeholders that there's additional information and analysis that would be useful to perform from an interconnection-wide perspective. And that's how our latest report, the Western Assessment of Resource Adequacy, was born. Chris, you also asked about important considerations when it comes to resource planning. I would say for WECC, over the last several years, there have been a lot of changes that have forced us to reevaluate some of the processes and metrics that we use for determining resource adequacy. So for example, the changing resource mix, and Dede talked about the duck curve, different elements, different attributes of the resource mix have forced us to look beyond just that peak load hour of the year and caused us to transition from more of a deterministic type look at the system to more of a probabilistic, where we're looking at every hour of the year to assure that the system is resource efficient. Other challenges, such as the recurrent extreme weather events, are forcing us to look at the range of load patterns that we use in our studies, forcing us to expand what we once thought were low probability events and incorporate those into the types of assessments that we do. But I too am looking forward to more questions and more conversation with this panel, and so I'll go ahead and leave it there, and we can turn it back over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Branden. I hadn't actually yet asked the question on the most important considerations, but I appreciate you addressing that one.
Oh,
and
apologies.
I think that you're totally good. Branden and I do a lot of pairing on discussions together, so we anticipate each other's questions on a regular basis, trying to fill in the gaps. I'll leave this question open to the panel as a whole, and I'm wondering and I think that based on your different perspectives and positions within the interconnection, that the answers will vary. So I'm happy to hear what each of you have to say on it, but describe what your take on the current status of resource adequacy is in the West. And then if the West were to do nothing, where do you think that we would be in 5 years? I can go round robin the same way that we did presentations, or if you all just want to chime in, that works for me too. All right, Chair Decker, would you like to go on that one, or you want someone else to go first? You're muted.
Double muted. So you're asking if the West does nothing, where will we be in 5 years? And, or did you have another question before that?
Well, the first one was, what do you think the current status of RA is in the West? But I think that it's well paired with, if we were, depending on what your answer to that question is, if we were to do nothing, where would we be in 5 years?
Okay, all right, great. Well, I would describe the West as in transition on resource adequacy. I think that the resource technologies that are most prominent today and going forward in our region, and the new modeling methodologies and increased complexity of those modeling methodologies needed to understand their contributions to the RA position. And we're also in transition on an area that's interesting to me, which is institutional transition. I think on the first one, certainly all resources contribute to reliability, but it seems we don't quite yet have a settled understanding of how the new resource mix or the future resource mix works together, and exactly how what the best way is to measure that, to credit it, to understand how it all fits together to put us in the position we need to be in. I think there's a lot of work going on that on there, but it seems that there's a lot of transition too. On the institutional side, I mentioned already that I think the Western Power Pool's efforts are really important when it comes to resource adequacy, of course, and they need to be able to develop and deliver the Western Resource Adequacy Program, and we're going to need, even though there's great momentum, a lot of continued commitment and problem solving to get there. I think the institutional side is so important because, as I said, I think there are some limitations from a state by state, utility by utility perspective to really being able to understand resource adequacy, and that's not going to come from sort of state commissioners cooperating in their spare time. We really have to build lasting institutional change. I'll just say that there are lots of other regional cooperation efforts in the form of day-ahead markets and other kinds of discussions going on, and those, of course, would be significant institutional changes that would give us not only more visibility and information, but maybe more efficient pricing and sharing. But so I think we're essentially in transition in these two ways, and if I'm not concerned that those two will go forward. I don't think there's really I don't think the West is doing nothing, and so I don't think we will do nothing. But taking the premise of your question, if the West does nothing, where will we be in 5 years? My answer is that we'll be freaking out and preparing to become individually overbuilt, overcommitted, under-optimized in a way that is more costly than our consumers need. It's hard for me to look at the level of responsibility that the utilities we regulate take for their system and think that we're truly going to be in a resource supply reliability failure. But if we get to that point, it will perhaps be because we're not because we don't have the wherewithal to push forward individually in a less optimized way if these institutional changes don't come through to increase efficiency. But the fear that I have is more around failing to anticipate just incrementally incremental issues related to the changing climate, new extremes and new risks, and the changing resource mix, the new methodologies and coordination practices. Those strike me as places where if we aren't really looking forward, they could cause problems.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. I have kind of a follow-up. You are clearly well-versed in all of this, and I've seen you speak on panels before about RA. You've been heavily involved in the conversations with the RAP. And you mentioned when you just spoke about how what commissioners do in their spare time. I appreciate that this is not your day job and that all of these extra responsibilities are evening hours and weekends that you put into making sure that these things are taken care of. So you, as a commissioner for the state of Oregon and a voice in the region, are heavily involved in the conversation. If there were a piece of advice that you could provide to other commissioners that would be helpful for everything that you just said about where we're trying to get to and the things that we can address, what would be your piece of advice to other commissioners on like the best way that they could or should contribute to the conversation?
Wow, that's a hard question. I think I'm not sure that every commissioner out there shares my philosophy that collective approaches to understanding and action are probably better for my state's consumers than state by state actions. So I suppose if you take my premise, then I think that relationship building, understanding, taking the time to understand what all these different institutions do, try to work toward what they can do better. I think that by doing that, we leverage more than we can produce just by acting within our states. I think there is just an efficiency to understanding how your staff and your commission can use the things that WECC is doing, the models that RAP is coming up with to support their work and not have to reinvent the wheel. So while I accept that this work is additional to the day job stuff, I only do it when I see it as a better way to get the day job done for our consumers in the long run. And so I guess my advice would be sort of finding those places where you being involved in the conversation and developing relationships with other commissioners and institutions is going to bring value over, in the long run to the consumers that you're representing.
I appreciate that. I know that was an off-the-cuff question that you weren't necessarily prepared for. I think that I think it's critical. I did when I sat in the commissioner's seat. I think I see it even more now in the role that I have with WECC. And so I appreciate your comments on that, because I think that there are probably other commissioners listening who are looking for ways that they can contribute. And I think that that's really solid advice. So thank you for that. Dede, did you have a response to how do you feel like the current status of RA is in the West? CAISO has a unique seat, and I'm looking forward to Todd's different answer on this when we get to him, because CAISO, while they are just within the state of California, it's obviously multiple utilities that are working in concert with one another to address the issue. And then, of course, Todd's will be from his seat behind the desk of one utility and how that may interact with other utilities in the region. So if you'll share with us your thoughts.
Sure, thank you. while I was thinking about this, I started reflecting, right? I've been in California ISOs, and I've been managing, in the previous role, I was managing resource adequacy for a long time. And it's been my reflection that I think the one word that comes to mind is transformations. And the energy utility sector that we have, I think you probably have heard the quotes that was made by somebody at one point in time that this grid, this power system is no longer your grandmother's power system or something like that, right? Where we've been transforming. And it's true because I was just counting. I think there is like 83 load serving entities within the California ISO/BA, 83. And there are at least 27 local regulatory authorities. So when you think about it, we have 83 load serving entity with at least 27 RA program within the state of California. They're all different. The accounting is different, and I get to manage that and how it actually gets in there, how the puzzle gets together and meets in the day ahead in real time. What I have noticed and what I have observed is the fact that because the industry is changing, because the electric utilities is changing, because the transformation of the system, the load serving entity and the local regulatory authority, including the PUC, have worked together and brilliantly works together to start understanding what has been changing, set of characteristics of the resources that is needed to align the shifting load, to align the changes that we have. So we used to have a very simple counting rule. A long time ago, it was very simple counting rule. And then we moved from, what we call qualifying capacity to ELCC. We keep moving this, right? And then just about, I think last month or maybe earlier this week, or I don't even remember now, the California PUC have another adoptions of what we call the 24 slice of day, so to speak. But I think it goes to what Chair Decker was mentioning. The Western Interconnection realized and recognized that we are, it's our job, it's our collective job to keep the lights on. It's our collective job to keep the light on. We are working together. So I am very pleased to see that we are all working together to adapt, to transform, having what type of resource characteristic, what type of accounting. And I think, the event that occurs in California with the insufficiency of the resource a couple of years ago, I think, and that kind of brought up to light. And I always joke about this. I mean, it's sad to say that Branden actually telling everybody, his staff already told people that we are short, and it did become short. And the operators, my operators, is having to struggle with finding and committing capacity and energy, and it's challenging. And I think we're seeing that right now as we are going through the transformation this year, and maybe others, maybe Todd can tell us a little bit more. But from what I heard, the well is kind of drying out. We are people scraping the bottom of the barrel for this year and maybe even for next year, trying to get a contracted capacity. So the whole notions where we always have power from the Northwest to serve everybody else in the world, it's not quite true, because there is that challenges with regards to really comes to a shortage on the capacity, so it can get reflected in the pricing of the capacity right now. So I think we are in the right track. We are going through these transformations, and we have to work on it together. So we have to work together to find the right characteristics, because the utilities industry, the energy, the load, the commercial, the residential, everybody is shifting and everybody is changing. Back to that notions about this power utilities is no longer your grandmother's network, I guess. So we all have to work together to work together to listen to each other and to get everybody's in. And at the end of the day, we have the collective same goal of keeping the lights on.
Great, thank you. In the mode of of working together to do this. You mentioned the change from ELCC to a 24-hour slice in the counting mechanisms that the CAISO uses for RA. Has CAISO made those changes in order to align with other entities in the region and the way that they count, or has it been purely an internal decision based on the change in resource mix and weather events and other things?
Yeah, the way that we looked at it is both, right? We have to look at this in the whole. In a sense, we're asking the question, what are the needs? What are the true needs for our system? And we know that the true need for our system is to serve the load. And we've seen, at least in California, that the load shift, the actual load shift is real. If you are in California, if you try to build a new house, they all have to be in net zero, so to speak. So many of the house, they have a good energy efficiency, but they also have rooftop solar everywhere. So when I buy a new house, any building, any new house, almost guarantee would have a new rooftop solar. So if you look at just like that, then you basically says, okay, the need is different. The need is no longer the same. Because of the need is different, then you have to adjust and shift of what is the solution, and it cannot be the same solution. So that's basically the coordination that we have with the PUC, with the agency, with all the local regulatory authorities. Define the need, right? You define the need. The need is the shifting, transforming utilities business, and then you have all this. For us in California, we have a different customer choice, for example. So that grows the LSC numbers for the customer choice aggregations and all those other stuff. So then we also want to get to green the system. So we want to reduce carbon emission. So we look at all the resources that we have. So that end up basically asking the questions. Okay, if given what we have right now, the need that we have right now, we need to look at whether or not our accounting system is going to meet the need for the system operators to dispatch the system. So a long time ago, we used the qualifying capacity function. Then we moved to ELCC. Then now we're looking at the different way of doing this. So that's continued to evolve, and that's because of the fact that we do need to adapt to what the needs are, and really just working together to get the solution to the needs that we have at hand.
Yeah, consistent with Chair Decker's message of partnerships and speaking to each other to make sure that we're communicating on the issues. So thank you for that. Todd, what are your thoughts from a utility perspective on where things are at right now? What kind of a state we're in?
Thanks, Chris. And the benefit of going after some of these other excellent presenters, I get to think about my answer with the benefit of their response. So if you'll allow me, from a vertical integrated utilities perspective, any decisions that we make have to kind of balance the reliability, customer affordability, and then those decisions have to be in keeping with our clean energy commitment. And the others talked about transition and transformation. Beyond just setting kind of targets for where we need the megawatts to end up and a diverse mix. I think about the word challenges, and I think Dede mentioned challenges, and certainly we're seeing a number of them where in the past, capacity was flush, and we didn't have to worry about the long lead times that new resources take. And I think back, Branden mentioned a number of these, but I made a little listing, of all the challenges that I can think of right now that are facing the West. And load growth is right at the top of that list. I can't stress enough how fast Arizona's load growth is happening right now in the residential, commercial, industrial, all those segments. We've got retiring coal plants and aging facilities kind of across the West. The reason we're here today is our transition to energy limited resources and these variable resources. The complexity of procuring more of these is really a challenge. We've got manufacturing facility lockdowns in response to COVID. There's the Department of Commerce investigation. Now we got a little bit of relief from that recently, but the bottlenecks are still there. We've got supply chain concerns and permitting delays. We also have regional climate conditions. We talked about that, heard that earlier, and wildfire risks that are causing problems. And we've got the increased risk of sustained drought that has a real impact on those hydroelectric facilities in the Northwest and others. So when you kind of put all those challenges together, I think it's just really important that we're having discussions like this to get in front of it. And you talk about, if we do nothing, where are we going to be? And I think about we'll be in a very reactive state. This gives us the chance to be proactive, to be thoughtful, and take those three pillars of reliability, affordability, and our own goals, and be responsive rather than just in a reactive mode. So I appreciate the fact that we're drawing attention to this issue for all regulators, for customers, and for others in just the business and in the building to understand what we're dealing with.
Thank you. So I appreciate the juxtaposition on this panel of Chair Decker from the Northwest, which has historically shared across the region, and that's sort of what the benefit of the region has always provided to one another, versus APS, which is in a different position. I think I'm less familiar with the desert Southwest, although becoming more familiar by the day, and with your help actually, and your company's help in that regard. And Arizona they're not in the same position that way, right? It's not a shared resources kind of theory that has proliferated across the region in the same way it has in the Northwest. So I'm curious about, do you think that everybody doing something the same way is very important, or can we get where we need to be to meet the needs of the customers in an affordable way by talking about it, right? By at least sharing information with one another. And I think that people have tried in the past to get everyone on the same page, right? And sometimes I don't think that you're going to bring everyone along to have the exact same dialogue, use the exact same terms, do the exact same studies. And so I'm curious, from your perspective in Arizona, whether you think that collaborating, not necessarily coordinating all efforts and dialogue, but just collaborating with the rest of the region will be enough to address the issues.
So I think the answer is kind of twofold. I think collaboration is key. I think we have we have hundreds of decades of years of experience with traditional resources, and we all can kind of shorten that learning curve by sharing information and sharing our approaches to how we can, properly address this, resource adequacy concern. But I do think if all VAs do what they need to do as LSEs, we'll be in a good position as long as all the, we have the regulators performing the appropriate oversight. If all of that comes together, I think we can be successful, but I think alone that is not the best choice. I think certainly having those collaborative opportunities to share resources, share learnings, all of that is necessary and will bear fruit for all of us.
Thanks, Todd. And we'll go to Branden, and I'm going to set the backdrop for Branden on this one about where are we at currently and what's the status of RA with WECC's former president and CEO, Jim Robb, who is now overseeing NERC, who has been on national television spots, which is sort of the first of its kind, right? We used to get trade press opportunities, but Jim Robb being on MSNBC and interviewed by the New York Times, and the press that NERC's summer assessment got this year with regard to resource adequacy and the concerns within the Western interconnection, and MISO was the other portion of the country that looked like there could be some issues. There's your backdrop, Branden, for WECC's assessment of where are we at specifically with regard to the Western interconnection on resource adequacy right now.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for the question and the backdrop. It's kind of funny because I took the same approach that Todd did. As we were talking, I just started jotting down all of the different challenges that we're facing right now, the supply chain issues, the changes in load, changing resource mix, the wildfires, the droughts, and I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And, the big challenge is that all of these things are happening concurrently. It's not that, we get a challenge and then we get a little bit of time to address it and then we're on to the next one. All of these things are happening at the same time in real time. And I think that's part of the reason why, the NERC summer assessment, why it's gotten a lot of press is because I think the general public recognizes the challenges that we're facing as an industry, the challenges we're facing with climate change and other things, and they're concerned, and they should be. We've noticed over the last few years that supplies are getting tighter, and especially with the resource mix that we have, we're recognizing that we need to look at resource adequacy in different ways. And like I said earlier, it's no longer can we meet that peak demand at the peak hour of the year, and if we can meet that, we're fine. We need to be looking at all of the hours of the years under different conditions to see if we have a sufficient resource fleet. And we need to make sure that, if there are areas that are depending on energy from other areas in the interconnection, that energy is actually going to be there when they need it most. And so, I want to go back to, something that Chair Decker and Dede talked about, and that is, the importance of wide area coordination. And you asked for our take on the current status of resource adequacy. And, I think for me personally, it's very encouraging to see, these programs coming up that really encourage wide area coordination, wide area planning, things like the Western Resource Adequacy Program, these new markets that are being proposed, because they really do, seek to leverage the diversity of the interconnection as we think about the resource needs of the future. And I definitely think that's a step in the right direction. But like I said earlier, with just the pace of change and the challenges that we're facing on a day-to-day basis, it's hard for me to look 5 years out and get worried about that, because I see the challenges that we're facing right now worrying me, tomorrow and next summer. And so I think that is our biggest challenge is remaining proactive as we address these challenges and working together as an interconnection to address the things that are coming at us.
So Branden, you mentioned the different regions' efforts towards resource adequacy programs like CAISO and the RAP. Do you feel like WECC is the organization that is best suited then to talk across the seams or assist with that dialogue across the seams? This is sort of probably a shameless pitch, which was not intended, but you talk about different programs within the region, but then we've also talked about how we all need to be talking with one another to make sure that everybody's needs are getting addressed, and how that and Chair Decker addressed how that will result in efficiencies, all of which I agree with. But is it WECC or is it somebody else then that assists with the dialogue to make sure that people are talking across the seams, so that the RAP program and the CAISO program, although they don't have to mirror one another, they kind of know what each other are doing and keeping track of the resources as all of that develops.
Yeah, and I don't want to presuppose any solutions to some of the seams challenges that we've always had and that we probably will have as we see more programs coming online. But I definitely think WECC has been historically a place where entities can come together to talk about interconnection-wide challenges. I think WECC is suited to be an organization that can facilitate some of these conversations. I will say that when Chair Decker was talking about some of the overlap, we're very conscious of all of the effort that it's taking to spin up the RAP program, and we definitely don't want to get in the way of progress there. And so I think that that's another thing that we need to be concerned about, as well as making sure that whatever we do, at the WECC level or wherever, that we're contributing to the solution of these challenges, and not creating more roadblocks or creating more distractions from getting to the right solutions. So I guess to dance around your question a little bit more, Chris, I do think that WECC is a great place in the West. We don't have an interconnection-wide technical entity that typically facilitates these kinds of conversations. But as we've seen, wide area coordination, wide area collaboration, to the extent that we can, wide area consistency, I think will help us kind of drive toward the answers we need to in this resource adequacy challenge that we have.
Thanks, Branden. So it's funny, when this panel was first envisioned, this discussion, we were talking about an hour-long forum, and I was like, there's no way we can't get through all this in an hour. And in fact, we have not, right? We've skipped around on questions, and we do want an opportunity for the rest of the audience to be able to put in questions and stuff. But I'm going to take a last 10 minutes or so to ask each of you from your unique perspectives. Oh, to follow up on that thought, we did envision it as an hour, and I was like, nah, not possible. We got to go to an hour and a half to get everything in. So I think we'll still be pressed to the limit on that. But the last question that I would love each of you to address from your unique perspectives and seats is, what do you think the most important action is that the West can take in the next 6 to 12 months to address these resource adequacy needs, concerns? Take it from any angle you want, but what can we best do, the best action that we can take? Chair Decker.
The most important action that the West can take in the next 6 to 12 months is successful initiation of the Western Resource Adequacy Program. You can talk about things that can be better, ways their methodology can be better, but we can't do 12 things at once, and that is one that takes us beyond ad hoc collaboration or coordination and into something that is potentially more sustainable. And so to me, a lot has gone into that and taking that across the finish line. And in whatever way you approach it, maybe you approach it from a critical perspective, or you're an institution builder, or you're entity seeking to determine whether it makes sense to participate. But I just think, really engaging in the effort to get that across the finish line is the most important thing in the very near term to me.
Great, thank you very much. Dede, what do you think the most important thing that we can do in the next 6 to 12 months is?
I think we've already said it. I think many of us already said it, that, listen to each other, right? Listen to each other, collaborate. The fact that things has worked in the past, but things has also changed. And if we don't adjust, if we don't pivot, we might see ourselves in the trouble. So I think, recognizing, I think it's always one of those things that first you recognize that there are challenges, and not just one challenge. There's actually multiple challenges. It's a hard thing to do, and it's kind of similar situation that I always tell back to the parenting, going with my 15.5 years old that wants to start driving and all this other stuff. First, you recognize that there's a challenge. Two, that you go through, you look at the data and the fact, and sometimes you have to go through your denial stage and say that, okay, I guess it has changed. My 15.5 years old is no longer 10 years old. I cannot just do what I used to be doing 10 years old when she was 10 years old. So I went through that denial process to say that, 15.5 years old is different than 10 years old. And then we move on, and we come up with collaborations and different strategy and figuring out in there. So I think that would be my thought. And I think, I know you don't ask these questions, but I also WECC probably would have to figure out what role and what task that you would like to do, because I think there is a good opportunity here as well with what WECC can do. I know what WECC has to do. We know what WECC has done in the past, but there's always these questions. But now that it's all shifted, what would WECC do, or what could WECC do, and garner and just get that potential out there for the betterment of Western connections.
So first I'll address the teenage comment, which is that, and you up your insurance.
That's right. Almost. It's coming here. Another half a year, I will up the insurance.
And in Idaho, they can begin driver's ed at 14 and a half. So I had to address that a year before you did. I just want to point that out. That's traumatic when your kid can't barely see over the top of the steering wheel. But I get the metaphor. I like that it came full circle from Chair Decker's start. I would also say, to your point about what WECC can do, we definitely want to be a resource in that regard, right? We want to help these conversations. That is the vision of these forums, is to get people within the region on the same page in order for us to be able to address the concerns in a more fulsome way, so that we're talking to one another as opposed to across or past each other. So I appreciate you throwing that one out there. Todd, what do you think? What are the best things that we can do in the next 6 to 12 months to address these issues?
Thanks, Chris. I think Chair Decker said it well when she said can't prioritize everything, or something similar to that. And the other answers were certainly other ways that you could go with this question. But I think we first kind of have to define the problem, which is this series of discussions is certainly helping to do that. Then to address that problem, I think we need the right tools to dive in. And I think there's a series or conversations to come on some of our modeling tools. And I'll say that, we're certainly noticing that they're immature in this space, and the feedback loops have yet to kind of fully realize the benefit, because we are so immature in the deployment of some of these newer resources. So I would say, very active user groups to provide feedback, to help spur activity and help share information, so we're understanding of any of the shortcomings and can help address those. And so we're all kind of going into this with a common understanding. We may not all kind of speak the same language in the various tools we're using, and I think that diversity of approach is positive, but certainly understanding the differences and those nuances, so that we can achieve kind of the right result is important.
I absolutely agree. I think that it's okay to have different approaches to it all, as long as we're talking to one another about those. I actually think that it may be beneficial in the long run, because some people are catching things that others aren't. And as long as we're all talking about those things, then everybody in the region is getting the benefit of greater information based on the multiple studies that are being done. So I appreciate the nice pitch to our next session a month from now too, on August 3rd, regarding those studies. So thank you, Todd. I appreciate your perspective on that. Branden, what do you think we can do in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, I think the communication piece is going to be critical. I still don't feel like we're all on the same page when we talk about resource adequacy. I think it means different things to different people. So really, coming to a common understanding of the problems we're trying to solve and who's doing what in that space, I think are going to be critical. The other piece I keep thinking about, that's gotten a lot of attention lately, is the transmission component of this as well. And there's a lot of activity, a lot of action going on at the federal level as well as local levels around transmission planning and specifically transmission planning processes and ways to improve those. I think that you can't really completely treat resource planning on its own and then treat transmission planning on its own. There's got to be some kind of a coordinated effort to look at those two things together, and I think that that's going to be one of the next big questions that we're going to have to bring into this conversation, as well as what role does transmission planning play in this resource adequacy conversation? What role should it play? And really, how do we seek to get some clarity around the challenges we're facing there as well? So not to keep piling more problems or challenges on top of others, but I see that as another one that's kind of coming at us quickly that we're going to need to get our arms around.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up transmission, and I saw Chair Decker nodding her head as you were speaking about it. And of course, WECC's board just acknowledged, as a reliability risk priority, WECC has addressed resource adequacy for the last couple of years and done a bunch of studies. And this year, last month, in fact, our board adopted resource adequacy as an ongoing reliability risk priority and added that transmission piece to it. I think a recognition of You sort of can't have one without the other in order to address resource adequacy. The likelihood of needing some transmission in that space, especially with the types of resources that are being onboarded, needs to be addressed in conjunction with. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I want to thank all four of you for your contribution to the conversation. Please do not go away. We are going to have a portion, the last 20 minutes or so will be a stakeholder discussion, and we would love for you to continue as part of the conversation. But I can't thank you enough. This is kind of our kickoff event for these, and I think it's been a great discussion, and I hope that everyone stays tuned. And I just appreciate each of your contribution to the ongoing discussion as the West develops. And I'm going to throw things back to Travis.
Chris, thank you so much. And a special thanks to our panelists for joining us. As Chris mentioned, we are going to turn it over for questions. We're going to bring in Victoria Ravenscroft. She's the Senior Policy and External Affairs Manager here at WECC, and she's going to help kind of moderate some of those questions. And Victoria, I'm not seeing any hands raised right now, but I did put a message in the chat. If you'd like to share your thoughts, please use the raise your hand feature, and we'll get you added to the question queue here. You can also use the chat feature as well.
All right, thank you, Travis. We'll give it just a moment for people to raise their hands, and otherwise we've got some questions for you. I will let people know, get out your mobile device. We're going to use a tool that we use quite a lot now called Slido, and it requires you to take a picture of a QR code or log into the internet to answer some of the questions that we're going to have for you after we give folks a chance to raise their hands and ask any questions of our panelists. All right. Chris Parker, I see that you've got your hand raised. Can you unmute yourself and let's hear your question?
So I'm actually really interested in these resource adequacy questions in sort of a different way. You've got a program like the Western Resource Adequacy Program that seems to be fairly focused on that near-term resource adequacy, right? It's that very near in time forward showing. And then we've got like utility planning mechanisms like the IRP that are, looking 10, 20 years out. And it seems to me that what we're learning is a lot more granular information about how these systems operate and where we need to focus our energy. And it feels to me like most of that learning is showing up in a resource adequacy thing like the RAP program, and maybe not filtering to a longer term planning system like the IRP. And so what I'm trying to figure out is how we acknowledge the reality of how things are operating that we see in the near term while we're doing that longer term planning that doesn't seem adequate to the task.
Chair Decker, go ahead, and if you have an answer or comment on that question.
Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer, but I love that question. And one thing that I clarified and confirmed for myself in asking some questions about the Western Resource Adequacy Program is that, yes, the forward showing period is more near term, but I think an important part of what they're trying to put together is a longer term, I can't remember how many years, 3 or 5 year forward showing that will be an important complement. And I think it's just one of those things where it's just like, how many things can you do at once? And that kind of near term forward showing an operational program is kind of the core of it. But I do think from that foundation, there can be other things added onto it. And I also really loved your question about sort of why this stuff isn't feel like it's filtering into IRPs, and for that I would just point to the answer to the one thing that, or the most important thing to do in the next 6 to 12 months that our friend from APS gave, which was work on our methodologies. One of my frustrations is that in the regional landscape, there's seems to be like a lot of good conversation going on about what methodologies we use and what are the most appropriate. Frankly, that can become a little confusing when it's put out ahead of the technical folks having worked out their stuff. But I guess my point is that I would love to see some resolution to some best practices on those and such that we can make sure that those are filtering into IRPs. That's a goal of mine. I don't know if that's responsive to your question, but I did appreciate the question.
Great. Any other panelist responses to Chris's comments and question?
Victoria, I can take a shot. I'd say internally it takes coordination. It's a lot of good alignment between the planning team, the resource acquisition team, your ops folks, and your folks that are connected to the different development of these other programs like the REP and the markets and anything like that. Having that common understanding is key, so that your targets are well aligned and that you're all kind of marching to the same beat and playing from the same sheet of music. I'd say that's your solution there.
Great, thank you for that response. Any other panelist response before we go on to our next hand raised? Okay, thank you, Chris, for the question. Let's move on to Guy. Guy, can you unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment, please? Guy, are you able to unmute yourself? Oh, there you go. Perfect.
Hello.
Hello. What's your question or comment?
Okay, I find this a fascinating discussion, and it seems to me, before I ask the question, that the problem here is to develop an optimal way of sharing and developing the resources of all the participants there. And which in itself is a fascinating operations research problem. Now, I'm just wondering, who is the entity that will do this optimal research, of what's the best way of sharing resources, and including, as Branden suggested, the transmission that needs to be developed to do that. It's my understanding that WECC is not involved in that. So if WECC is not involved, who will do this?
Okay, great question. Let me open that up to the panelists and see if not WECC, then whom? And I would add to that, if WECC, how does that look?
So Victoria, I'll just jump in and hopefully
go ahead.
We'll just jump in and hopefully I can start some maybe thinking or conversation. So yeah, I think that's the $1 million question is, how do we develop the most optimized system? And I think that's where the transmission component really comes in as well as, do we just keep building more and more and more resources, or can we leverage transmission to really make the system itself more efficient? And so I think directly to answer your question, Guy, is I don't think there is currently an entity that is doing like an interconnection-wide optimized type solution to some of these challenges that we're seeing. How that happens, I think that there's a lot of questions around that. Like Chair Decker said, there are a lot of activities that are going on, and I mean this is a very complex problem to try and address, a very complex challenge to take on at this time. And you kind of wonder, all right, how would that play out? How do you bring the right people together to start having those conversations around developing a system or a process to identify the most optimized way to proceed with development in the Western interconnection? And I really hope that these conversations that we're going to be having through this discussion series will start to surface some of the answers to that very question, because I think once you get people from various backgrounds, different experiences coming together and talking about these issues, I think we're going to get some insights that we wouldn't have otherwise. But I think it's a great question, and it's certainly a question I've been thinking an awful lot about over the last couple of years or so.
Great, thank you, Branden. Chair Decker, did you have a comment to make in response to Guy's question?
I can let Dede go first. I can pitch in something after that.
Dede, go ahead. What's your response to Guy's question?
I think traditionally, and we've always asked the questions, is it the generation that we need, the resources that we need, or is it the transmission that we need? And traditionally, we have always kind of observed that, building a transmission lines are going to take longer than building a generator. And that's why I said that traditionally, especially if you're trying to build a 500 kV line or 345 kV line across different regions. And that's why we do the 10-year transmission planning, or now we're even doing 20-year transmission planning. And that's because the transmission does take a little bit more lead time. So the question that I often had in my mind is, I think transmission is going to be good, but can we actually get the transmission within a year or 2 or 3 that we actually need it? Because what I'm observing right now in the operation world is that the elephant in the room is that, well, there is nothing to share. I mean, it's always good to think that there is something to share, but the elephant in the room is that for next year, there's nothing to share because everybody is short. When everybody is short, there's nothing to share. So until you have something to share, the concept of optimizing is, this is probably, I'm just being blatantly honest here, is that the concept to optimize and share assume that there is something to optimize and there is something to share. There is a still in the ground, there is something in the ground to actually share and optimize. When you are seeing a capacity price the way it's rated right now, as much as it is right now, it's basically going to say that there is nothing else to share. Because the economic and the price is true reflections of this is not scarcity, this is shortage. Scarcity pricing does one thing, but shortage does another thing. So I think, for the short term, we are dealing what we are with regards to the current state of the capacity availability. But for the longer term, yes, I think we should be able to look at the optimum between the generation and the transmission, recognizing that the transmission is going to take a longer time than the generation. So that's what goes through my mind at this point in time. Of course, I'm more on the operations perspective, so I'm looking for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and it is harder to build transmission in that time frame.
Great points. Thank you, Dede. Chair Decker.
I was just going to say that I kind of heard 2 questions being asked. One, again, was who does it? And that's the institutional question. And the second question is sort of how are the disparate pieces that have to work together, generation, transmission, load, being modeled in a coordinated way. And I think on the institutional question, there is just simply no silver bullet for our region right now. Sometimes I make maybe our West-wide RTO joke, could do it. Just literally that is why people have single institutions where at least you can solve the who question, even if you still have challenges in bringing together the other pieces. I don't think that holds any great promise. And so answering the who question in the West right now is really complicated and takes a lot of sort of sophistication and understanding how different entities can do important pieces of the work that other ones won't do without stepping on each other's toes. And I thought actually that the transmission planning panel at the CREPC-YRAD meeting got into some of that conversation where it was indicated that, WECC can do some high-level transmission planning without getting into the space for transmission that they're not wanted in, which is looking at specific projects and, you know, the things that the Order 1000 organizations do. On the substantive side, like, I couldn't be more frustrated with the lack of connection between resource planning and transmission planning right this second that's going on in the transmission planning organizations that I'm involved in. I mean, this is just pure engineering, looking at committed, absolutely committed resources 10 years out. It gives us no helpful information about the trade-offs around how the transmission system might need to grow, or what generation paradigms give us the most efficient use of our scarce rights of way. So that piece of sort of how generation and transmission are looked at together, I think, is one that needs some attention, and I'm really pleased with WECC's decision to try to move forward in that space.
Great, thank you for that response, and thank you for the audience questions. We're looking at about 5 minutes left here, so we're going to turn the tables on the audience a little bit here. And panel, we're going to give you a break, give you a breather for the last 5 minutes anyway. And we're going to do a quick Slido poll. So if you pull out your mobile device or go to slido.com, just take a quick picture of it if you're on your mobile device. And there's a poll there. What we want to know from you is, what's the single greatest resource adequacy challenge facing the West right now? We've got over 160 of you on here, and let's see if we can populate this a little bit, sort of as a parting thought exercise here. All right, so I can see people have got it open. We'll start seeing responses popping up here in just a minute. Okay, good. So resource retirements, that's one we've heard a little bit about today. Governance, turf, that's an interesting one. The electrification issues, climate change, big one there. A couple there on transmission, another one with governance, deliverability, retirements, dispatchability. No RTO. There you go, Chair Decker. There's, to your joke, there's a lack of an RTO. Lots of transmission being referenced here. What I'm gathering here is that identifying the problem, as many of our panelists mentioned, is a challenge, and we're kind of seeing that play out here, because we don't have, you know, a single answer coming through on these questions. All right, we'll let this roll for just one more minute here before I turn it back over to Travis to see us out. We've got more transmission coming through, some calculation or analysis references here to the planning reserve margin, the pace of climate change. So as we can see, we've got quite a number of these. So we'll let that poll sit for just another couple seconds. And I just want to thank the panelists. I want to thank the audience for joining us today. We had a great turnout, and we're very excited about this. And with that, Travis, I think we'll close this poll, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great, Victoria, thank you so much. And I just echo the thanks to today's panelists, Chair Decker, Dede, and Todd. We appreciate you taking the time to join us in such an important discussion. The discussion continues. Mark your calendars. We'll be hosting the Resource Adequacy Discussion Series on the first Wednesday of each month. So I put a link in the chat where you can check out a little bit more of some of the topics that we're planning on discussing next month. On August 3rd, we'll be taking a look at assessments and a comparative overview of assessments across the West. So mark your calendars for that. Again, thanks so much to our panelists.
Hey, Travis, don't forget Branden.
I was just going to say, and Branden and Chris and Victoria. I'm looking back to the WECC staff here. So thank you all so much. And to our attendees and stakeholders, we appreciate you joining us and taking the time here.
Thanks so much.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.